Welcome to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Join us as we dive into the world of endurance sports, exploring everything from nutrition to training and how these elements shape your everyday life, both on and off the race course. Hosted by Coach Justin, certified run and triathlon coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, along with Coach Katie, a registered dietitian specializing in sports nutrition and owner of Fuel to Run. We're here to share insights and real-world advice to help you thrive on your journey. Here at the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast is where your journey begins. Welcome, everyone, to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm your host, Coach Justin. I'm here with Coach Katie, and today we have a special guest. Her name is Jen Fishman. So this is part of our Athlete Story series. Jen is a draftsman for a local home builder and a running coach. She coaches cross country for Eaton High School and is also a coach for Team Run Run out of Fort Collins, Colorado. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about training and running through pregnancy. So Jen is going to be sharing her story on how she ran during her multiple pregnancies. One of the things that I know that I would like to talk about is the differences between those experiences. So if anybody is a parent, you know that the personality of one child varies from child to child. So it seems reasonable that experiences for pregnancy can vary. So if you're looking for consistency in those experiences, you may be a little bit surprised. And so Jen will share her story and some of how her experiences have gone. Jen is due, by the way, in mid-December, and I don't want to take up too much more time. So I want to turn the mic over to Jen. Thank you, Jen, for joining us, and let's get started.
I wanted to have Jen share just a little bit of her running story, in total, like how she got started, and then also like a little bit of her background in running, and then we can dive into the pregnancy piece because I did want her to share a little more of that before we kind of jump into that. So yeah, tell us your story.
Okay, so I was not an athletic kid, but my mom started running after she had her fourth kid. And so when I got to middle school, I was like, okay, well, I should do a sport. So I started running, started on JV, realized, I'm getting faster pretty quick, made it to varsity, ran through high school. Shout out to my high school coach because our team won the first state championship for our high school in high school when I was back then. And he's won 20 state championships since between the boys and girls. So, in the past 20 years, 20 state championships is pretty good. When I was looking to run in college, my priority was actually academics. So I thought to myself, I'll get into the school first. And if I'm able to run, I'll run. So I went to school for architecture. Virginia Tech was the top ranked architecture school in the country at the time. And I got in there. And once I got in, I called the coach and said, hey, I'm going to be here whether or not I'm able to run, but I really want to run. So he let me run. I wish it was a better experience for me, but I got to my fourth year and had the opportunity to either study abroad or run and decided I would rather go to Germany than keep kind of running okay. So basically quit running for a few years. And then when I came back as an adult, I said to myself, you know what? This got really bad for me in college. If I start to feel like this is more pressure than joy, I'm going to stop. So that's kind of the approach I've taken as an adult with running, is that it needs to be something that adds to my life, but isn't the focal point and doesn't take away. And that's also how I've approached it with pregnancy and kind of how I've looked at where things are at. Is it something that's adding to things right now? Is it undue pressure? Am I enjoying it? And that's been my baseline for how I train.
So you started in, you said middle school?
Yeah.
Kind of ran through high school, and then you were in college. Tell us, I'm just curious, would you mind sharing a little, or do you feel uncomfortable? Because I know for me personally, I didn't have the best college. I mean, it was a challenging college experience, and I think had you asked me 10 years ago, I wouldn't share much, and now I probably would, but I know that's a touchy subject. Do you mind sharing more about kind of what was your experience in college? I know that a lot of women are kind of speaking out a little bit. So yeah.
So I think for me, as I said, because I chose college for academics over athletics, I wasn't looking for a coach fit. The coach who was at Virginia Tech at the time, and he's back there now, is Ben Thomas, who actually coaches Cole Hawker. So he's an incredible coach. He's a brilliant guy. He was not a good mental match for me. I would go into workouts and there'd be pace prescriptions that were close to what at the time for me were PRs. And in my head, as like an 18 or 19-year-old kid, I was like, I can't run this. It didn't occur to me like, oh, coach thinks I can run this, so that's awesome. It was more like, I don't know what I'm going to do, and did not establish very much trust between me and the coach. There were things like I'd go into a workout and he'd say, if you can't do it, we'll adjust it. I never got a workout adjustment. I don't think I had a single workout that I went through and I was like, that was really successful. I felt good about that. So it kind of ran me down, took away some of that joy in running that I'd had before, just because I felt like I didn't come out of any runs feeling positive. My easy runs felt awful. My workouts felt awful. I wasn't recovering. Girls would get injured and come back and they'd be way faster than me, which in retrospect, they were getting this overloaded training. And then they'd get that load taken off and they'd be able to adapt to the training better than me, who was just running the whole time because I didn't injure very easily. Yeah. So as I said, by the time I got the opportunity to do something else, it was kind of an out for me because I think I'd been feeling obligated to do it. And all of a sudden I was like, this makes sense. I'm going to go to Germany. I'm not going to run anymore. We're done.
Like, I need a break. I'm burned
Yeah.
out. Like I had a burnout experience too in college. So similar to my experience was kind of similar to Jen's too. But so you take 2 years off, and then did you, like, you kind of mentioned it, but like getting back into running, what was your, like, I'm gonna get back into it? Like, what was the motivation to do that? What kind of prompted you to be back at it after you had this kind of negative experience?
I think for me, it was more being able to make that choice to do it, because I think that when you get caught in that team scenario where you're running for high school or you're running for college, there's an obligation to something bigger than you. But when I was choosing to do it, all of a sudden it was like, I don't have to ever run another race. I could literally just go for runs, enjoy them. They don't have to be fast. I don't have to do workouts. But that said, I did enter an 8K race that first year back and ran it faster than I'd been running 5Ks in college. So I was like, there's something to being able to train with joy as opposed to with a sense of obligation.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So you're back, you're running. Have you done a couple of marathons, right? Share a little bit about what races you've done. Yeah, a little more there would be really great. I just want to hear, I want to hear more about you.
So I actually do like to share my marathon times because
what runner doesn't want to share about their marathon times?
So my first marathon, I did not train appropriately for. It was Marine Corps Marathon in 2016. And I ran a 4:35. And I ran 2 more in between there. I brought it down to 3:50 at Cheyenne Marathon, then 3:19 at Colorado Marathon in Fort Collins. And then I ran Houston Marathon the week after my kid turned 2 while I was still breastfeeding him. And I ran a 2:58 there.
That's like an interesting trajectory of I'm thinking about. I feel like my times have all been so close, like even my first time, but you made such progress like each time. It's like such a big chunk of time taken off. That's great. I feel like that's the other thing when you're having a kid, it's hard to like plan for the future like that, or what are you going to train again for? But all right, let's jump into a little more. Do you have any other questions or anything you're curious about, Justin?
One thing that I did want to bring up is your experience with the coach. I think that this really highlights the coach-athlete relationship, and where, because I see a lot of posts on social media. It's like, hey, I'm looking for a coach. And, I think that the tendency for some is just like, okay, they go into it basing it on price. Because we're all income restricted, right? So it makes sense. But I think that the most important thing is, regardless of, price and kind of like what you get, you really have to establish that relationship, that there's eventually got to be a trust component to it that kind of ties you together. And I think that the way that you described your experience in college really highlights when that piece is missing. not only did you not enjoy the act of running and the act of competing, but your performance suffered as well. And I think that really highlights the necessity to have that relationship with your coach. And it does take time, I think, to build. So there has to be a little bit of a patience component to it. I really liked hearing that story because it also kind of correlated with the stories that Katie has told us about, her past experiences in college. And I'm kind of curious if men have similar experiences. Do you find that maybe it's the fact that you have men coaches and they have a hard time relating to female athletes and they coach female athletes like they coach male athletes? It's just an idea. It's that I've just a thought because now I've come across like two college athletes, obviously gifted runners who had very similar experiences in college. And I'm just kind of curious on, now that you're a coach, what are some of your insights looking back at your college experience and kind of maybe come to some kind of explanation on maybe why it developed the way it did or the relationship just didn't develop and what kind of held it back a little bit, other than the performance anxiety that materialized?
I think there's probably a few things. I was not good at self-advocating. I think that would have helped me in that scenario. But then the flip side of things is, how much do you expect an 18 or 19-year-old living by themselves for the first time to self-advocate? And I see myself, even when I'm coaching kids, it definitely is easier for me to relate to younger females than younger males because my experience and the things that I dealt with, both mentally and physically, correspond more with a high school girl's experience than a high school boy's experience. And I'm kind of hoping that I'll be able to improve my ability to empathize with high school boys since I have a boy and have another boy on the way. I think that could be helpful. But I think it doesn't always occur to people who are coaching that there is a difference, not just from a physical perspective, but even a mental perspective, and how girls approach athletics and how boys approach athletics.
I think that's a great point. And I don't think it's age dependent. I think that there are obvious differences between men and women. I'm thinking that those differences still persist as we get older and reach into, master's level competition, while we become better advocates for ourselves. As you said, I think that there's still this effort that needs to be put forth by the coach to really kind of understand the athlete. And you're not prescribing workouts, you're not prescribing intensity levels and duration and all this kind of stuff. It's more than that. And so I'm really thankful that, you shared that story. The one thing that I would like to say is, like, how has your experiences in high school and college and then the return to sport impacted you now as a coach?
So I think the way I approach coaching as a general rule, especially with the kids, is that I want them to do well while they're in high school. But if the best they run is when I've been coaching them in high school, I feel like I failed. Because I want it to be sustainable. I want it to be something that they come out of thinking, that was a really good experience for me. This sport adds to my life. I want to keep doing it. So I try not to overstress or overload. I always say, like, your performance and how you run doesn't define you. You need more than this sport. And even, like, I have a runner right now who's probably going to be able to run for whatever college she wants. But I told her, I said, running is not a guarantee. When you choose your school, it needs to be a good fit across the board. You need to be somewhere that you can live if you're not running. So I guess just not making it the focal point, having it be something that adds to the things that are important to you, but not being the thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I think in your experience too, kind of with the coaching experience in college, it's like you can you can instill that sort of knowledge in your athletes. I think, like, this was, I don't know if you've ever shared with her some of your experiences, but I think that's great. If somebody had told me going into college myself, like, because I chose the college not for any of not for academics and not for the coach because I didn't know the coach. I chose it because it was the best school in the whole nation for running. That was the reason I went. And that wasn't a very good reason at all. So I think knowing that now, I think that's very great, very good advice because if I had been, I mean, yeah, in retrospect, you always feel like you would do it differently, but coaching now, and I've coached in middle school, which is a little different than high school, but the same thing. I totally agree with Jen. It's making it, I want them to be running when they're my age. I want to hear, like maybe someday when I'm like in my 60s, one of the students be like, I'm still
Yeah.
running, and I'm seeing them still enjoying it. And that to me will be when I've been a successful coach. So, yeah, I think that's wonderful. Yeah. Any other thought? I mean, we can dive into the pregnancy piece if we're ready.
Yeah,
I
let's
know.
let's jump into that.
All right. So, okay, I want Jen to jump in. I've had one pregnancy, so it's not been like my experience is profound. So I might share a little bit, but I'd really love to kind of, Jen, if you'll share like a little bit of your experience through your first pregnancy and what you're running, and then how you're approaching this pregnancy and how it might be a little bit different. So just kind of, share as much info as you feel comfortable, but we'd love to hear both experiences and kind of where you're at.
Yeah. So I got pregnant with Teddy in 2019. I found out I was pregnant probably a week after a missed cycle, but my running was feeling like sluggish, and I'd just run a marathon the month before, so I assumed it was part of recovery and maybe I wasn't recovering as well as I thought I should. An interesting thing is at that point I was fully committed to a mile a day run streak that had started in 2017. And so I just went into it thinking like I'm going to run a mile every day, whether it's a 12-minute mile or an 8-minute mile. I was still doing workouts throughout. I ran Mountain Avenue Mile out here, and I ran like 550, and I think I was like 16 weeks along at that point. Um, just generally, I didn't ever feel like being pregnant was doing more than maybe slow me down a little bit, but I always felt like physically capable of running to the extent that I ran every day up until the day before I delivered. And I was in pretty good shape for recovery, so my doctor actually gave me the go ahead two weeks after delivery to be like, just run a little bit. If you feel like you're bottoming out, stop, but you can start running. So I started running pretty quickly after that one. And it went well, didn't have any issues, pretty smooth, which maybe set me up for unrealistic expectations of what your typical pregnancy would look like. Because I want to make the caveat that I had extenuating circumstances going into this pregnancy. I actually had an ectopic pregnancy that I had to have major abdominal surgery for the month before I got pregnant again. And one thing about pregnancy that I didn't really understand during the first one because I was fit going into the first one is you cannot build fitness during pregnancy. And it just, there may be some people who are able to, but you should always assume you're the rule as opposed to the exception. And the rule is you cannot build fitness during pregnancy. So I came in off of like 6 weeks of not running at all. And I thought, okay, I will get to a maintenance point. Well, it's still early and it'll be fine. But I was struggling. I was walk running. It didn't feel good. I kept going. I ran a race in July that I had to walk like 5 times in. And I finally got to Mountain Avenue Mile, which is the same one I ran at 16 weeks with Teddy, and ran it. It felt awful. I ran like 7 flat and I was like, it's not doing it for me anymore. I need to stop. So I made the decision to stop. I've been walking, I've been staying active other ways, but I felt like the running, if I kept going, not only would it potentially not be healthy for me, but just the mental side of it, I wasn't going to enjoy it anymore. So from my perspective, it was better to miss it a little bit and come back to it after the fact than to keep pushing through something that was really just miserable for me at that point.
So I know I think there's a bigger part of this story here that you share as much as you're comfortable with. But I think, I think with pregnancy, I think when women are going through wanting to have kids, it's not always an easy process. And sometimes it takes longer. And when I don't know what the statistics are on like miscarriages and things like that. But, I think a lot of women struggle with becoming pregnant and maintain, it's just like it's not like you get pregnant and you're always, the pregnancy is always viable. And I think a lot of women struggle with that. And so I think that also impacts running a little bit, because I know Jen shared it and I want her to talk about it if she's comfortable, but just kind of that process of like having Teddy, and Teddy's how old? He's 5. So 5, and now she's pregnant again. But in between that time, they were wanting to have another child, and there's actually a whole story there. And I think that also is helpful to kind of talk about some of your struggles with that, and knowing in the back of your mind, like, I want to have another child, like thinking there's might be another pregnancy. How does that affect your ability to train and sign up for stuff? I mean, I hope I'm not oversharing. You don't have to share every detail, but I think, if there are women listening, I think they're going to hear this and be able to really resonate with it, especially if they've been trying or have, had fertility stuff. So here, I'd love to hear.
So after Teddy, we weren't necessarily trying, but we did get pregnant again in November. Well, I got pregnant in August of 2022, and we miscarried in November. And I was under the assumption that because we got pregnant without trying, it wouldn't be too difficult to get pregnant again, because we realized at that point we did want another kid. So we tried for a year. Nothing happened. In the whole of that year, I did sign up for a marathon, but in the back of my head, I was always like, well, if I get pregnant, I won't have to run it. So I trained for this marathon, got to it. My heart wasn't in it. I felt like crap, and I DNF'd the marathon because I was like, I'm going to hurt myself if I keep running. And I made the decision that I wasn't going to sign up for any other big races unless I got pregnant. And it took me another year plus to get pregnant. And really, I don't feel like I trained extensively for anything in that time, because there was always that thought in the back of my head, well, if I get pregnant, I'm not going to be able to race. Or if I get pregnant, it's going to derail my training, which, if I'm totally upfront and honest, I don't think that was a good mental place for me to be. It just took away from what I'd enjoyed about running before. I didn't feel like I could push myself appropriately. I didn't feel like I could make any goals because they could be thrown out the window at any given time. And so that uncertainty really messed with me for a while. And then the ectopic in some ways cured that, because I lost a tube. And so after the ectopic, I was like, well, if it took me 2 years to get pregnant with both functional tubes, I'm probably never getting pregnant again. So I was totally at peace with it. I was like, I have one wonderful kid. It kind of knocked some sense into me, where it's like, it's fine to want other things, but sometimes I think as a culture, we're so future focused. It's hard to sit in the things we have and enjoy the things we have and appreciate the things we have. So for me, having that happen, being like, wow, I'm so lucky to have my one kid. I'm so lucky to be able to do the things I love, and just stepping back and being like, okay, the way my life is right now is perfect, and I'm not going to worry about it anymore. But then I got pregnant. So
Yeah, that's usually what happens.
I'm like, well, maybe like just let it go. I don't know.
Just let it go. You just stop trying. You're just like, all right, I'm going to make plans.
lot
And then all of a
easier.
sudden, boom, there it is.
Yeah, it's a lot easier said than done, I think, to just be like, especially when you really want, if somebody really wants a larger family, to be like, I'm just going to let this go and have. But you're right. I think maybe having been at peace, who knows? But it is interesting. You kind of like gave up on, not kind of, but you're like, well, this is probably not happening. And then it's like, boom. But I think that brings up an interesting point too, is that piece of like, I think most people would be like that. I'm like, if I were signing up for something, but I wasn't entirely sure I was actually going to be able, I mean, we're never entirely sure we're going to make it to race day. There's always going to be like potential injuries and things like that. Like, but you don't know that, but you assume you're going to try to stay healthy. But this is a very unique situation, because when you're trying to get pregnant, there's no guarantee, but you just never know when it's going to happen, and sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's not. So sometimes that limbo can be challenging, and to maintain motivation through that is I think a hard thing to do, like especially if you're wanting to sign up for a race. So I think that is helpful to share, because I know Jen shared some of that struggle with me, and I'm like, yeah, that's gotta be challenging, because I know that I'd feel the same exact way if I were in that situation. Yeah, I think that I just wanted her to share, so thank you so much. You have any like thoughts or questions?
I guess the one thing that's at the front of my brain is we've talked about this before, and it's where when we train, we're looking, our goal is to stress the body to a certain point where it builds a level of adaptation. And then you deload that stress, you realize your fitness gains, and then you're able to re-stress the body again. That's how we build adaptation. And so what I'm curious on is during the training process, we're purposefully taking on stress to the body. So I'm curious if maybe if there's women out there that are trying to get pregnant and they're training at the same time, what is the impact of training stress on the body for something to where it may be hindering their ability to become pregnant? Is just the one thing. I mean, I know probably neither one of us have an answer to that question, but it seems reasonable
Well, yeah, I
that
think it's a reasonable. I
measuring
think
stress may have an impact
right.
on the body's
Yeah.
ability for a woman's ability to become pregnant. And so there may be this trade-off where it's just like, maybe I'm not going to train, but I'll exercise. And we talked about this in another podcast, the differentiation between training and exercise.
Like
And
fitness and training.
if
Yeah.
building fitness versus performance, then if the idea is that you want to become pregnant, maybe it's a worthwhile conversation to where it's like, well, maybe I'm just going to stop training and I'm going to work out for fitness purposes, and whatever those goals may be, if it may help the body's ability to become pregnant.
Yeah, it might be. It's an interesting thought. I mean, I never like my experience with it. But I can just share a little bit my own experience with pregnancy, and then Jen can kind of chime in too. But I actually completely stopped running before I got pregnant, and I was burnt out. I had like a bunch of stuff I did in 2017, and I'm like, I'm just over this running thing. I need a break, and I started power lifting. Just crazy to think because I'm definitely not built at all like a power lifter, but I'm like it's just lifting, and so I totally wasn't like I think I would run up and down my road maybe at most 2 miles once in a while. I wasn't running much at all, and I was just strictly and eating a lot. Like, I was eating so much to build muscle, and that is when I'm like, "Oh, I kinda we're gonna start trying," because I don't know how long this is gonna take. I've never really tried before. It was right around that time after a few months of the training and the eating a lot, I became pregnant. So I have no idea because I didn't try
Yeah.
before. So I have no idea if it was like if I'd been trying while I was marathon training and in that epic year of running and stuff, would I have had trouble then? I don't know, but I just felt it's very interesting that it's in this time and it was fairly easy for me to get pregnant. So it was like in this time of building muscle, eating a lot, trying to actually gain weight that I had, so I don't know. That's just my experience. Then when I actually became pregnant though, like Jen said, you can't really build fitness. And that's so I become pregnant. I'm sick. Like, so I had morning sickness. I'm throwing up. I feel awful. Like, that's not very conducive to running. So I'm trying to maintain some sort of fitness and walking and running. And then I coached a middle school like track team, and I'm trying to run with these kids at like 14, 12 weeks in. And I'm not super pregnant, but I'm like miserable and sick, and I'm trying to hold myself together and not puke in the middle of it. Nobody knows yet I'm pregnant, right? You don't tell people until you're like, maybe for me, I waited quite a while because I was afraid I would have a miscarriage or something. And then, I was afraid of that. So I just didn't tell anyone, but I'm here being miserable and totally uncomfortable, and nobody knows. Nobody knows what's going on. And so I'm trying to hold it together for these kids and hold it together for the other coaches. And we're at these track meets, like Jen said, that it can be like 8 hours long or whatever. And I'm like sick and just trying to hold it. So, trying to run with the kids, pretend I'm not pregnant. Yeah, it was interesting. But yeah, my experience going in was trying to run, and I definitely wasn't going to be building any fitness or able to run any, like, I ended up having to stop. I just decided it wasn't worth even trying to run at some point. I mean, and by the time I was just trying to run, and by the time I got really pregnant, it was just not happening. So, but I think I'm just kind of thinking to your question is, I don't know. It's hard. It's hard. It's interesting. I do think that if women are running a lot and under fueling, like, so you're adding this training plus maybe the underfueling piece, plus any other stress in their lives, like anything, it could be running, it could be any other type of athlete or any other type of stress. Obviously, especially if someone's missing menstrual cycles or there's other things going on, they're not going to be able to become pregnant. So I think it's not that I wouldn't necessarily recommend that a woman wanting to become pregnant that they stop training for performance, but I think it might be challenging because like we've talked about, the back of your mind, you're thinking, I'm not maybe going to be able to do this race. And then also you just have to be fueling and, thinking about the outside stresses. I think it's possible, but obviously our bodies are very protective. And so if we're overly stressed, not eating enough and losing our menstrual cycle and things like that, like that's our body saying, hey, I'm not actually ready to have a viable pregnancy. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it is I wouldn't necessarily tell someone not to train in their gym, but I think they would want to consider that. And if they're not becoming pregnant, that they might have to back off a little just to see. I don't know. What are your thoughts? What would you recommend?
So I did go to a doctor to address fertility issues during that year. And I did bring up the training as, is this something I need to lay off of? And basically, I did have regular cycles. Testing showed that I was ovulating. The things that are typically impacted by high stress athletics were not an issue for me. So I think it just depends a lot on the person. There are people who the doctors had said that like sometimes the point that you ovulate in your cycle can be pushed back in the cycle when you're training at a high level, which reduces the amount of time that you have for like implantation and all that. But you wouldn't necessarily know unless you went and got all those blood panels done to see when that's happening and what's going on. I think for me, my happy place in terms of health for when I've gotten pregnant before has been like 30-mile weeks with my regular intensity. And realistically, during my second pregnancy, it was probably closer to 40-mile weeks. And I was running pretty hard and I was still breastfeeding a little bit. So as Katie said, I think that there are markers that you can tell when your running is impacting that part of things. But also stress sometimes does weird things.
I think you can still have a menstrual cycle and be under a lot of stress. And then maybe
Yeah.
that stress would make it harder for you to be able to have a pregnant. Maybe you're not ovulating or the window is shorter, whatever, is happening physiologically in the body. But I think that's something women should consider. But I would never, if someone came to me, I would never be like, oh, you need to stop trying to perform and train. It might be like a question of mileage, like, okay, like let's not maybe the volume or, keeping intensity, lowering volume, maybe, but just ensuring they're eating enough to fuel them and plus like meet their needs at the very least to get um to not have that additional stress of underfueling. And then I think that is a question of like, okay, where's the other stress in your life? Like stress is a big factor and it doesn't matter where it's coming from. Those
Yep.
are things I would ask, but I would never like discourage a woman, from training and things if she was wanting to become pregnant. But I do think as a coach, that would be worth a discussion. Yeah.
I know that it would be a conversation that I would have if somebody came to me looking for coaching and they were of childbearing years. That would have to be a question that I would have to ask. If I didn't ask it, then it's a failure on my part. I think it's interesting because I mean, personally did not have the experience, but when with my ex-wife before we got pregnant with our second son, it took a long time for that to happen. And for some reason it wasn't happening. I mean, the first one came no problem. But when it came to trying to expand the family and add a second child, we tried for multiple years. And then, it's just like this frustration of like, oh, it's just not happening. It's not happening. And then all of a sudden we're just like, you know what? We're just going to stop trying. We started making plans to do something else. And then all of a sudden you're pregnant. So I think there's something to the stress that comes from trying and not succeeding. And I wonder if that kind of like fuel fits into the equation somewhere of like a delay for becoming pregnant. Because
Yeah,
I
that's a
mean,
good
I'm
question.
looking at two of us here that have had similar experiences where you're just like, it's just not happening. And then you stop trying and all of a sudden it happens. And then there has to be some kind of, some kind of impact. I would find it
Interesting.
hard to believe that it wouldn't.
It's
Yeah.
interesting because you wonder how much that psychological piece of wanting it so bad and trying, and then the disappointment that comes. Obviously, it's something you're trying and you're so optimistic, and then for a woman, it's like you have your period and you're like, or whatever, it's
Yeah.
coming, and you're like, it's that disappointment. You're like, it's crushing. You're like, it didn't happen, and now we've got to wait, and it's so hard. So I think there's a lot of psychological, I think, piece to that for sure. It's hard to say for sure. Like, I don't know if there's any research on that, but it's a good point. Yeah. I'm just like curious. I'm wondering if I'm thinking if I have any other like questions related to like your experience. Do you have any? Maybe we could dive into like just pregnancy in general and recommendations for
Yeah, let's go with that. And
running.
if a question kind of pops out of my head, hearing as the conversation evolves, we can always swing back
Yeah, we can always
to
kind of.
something else. But yeah.
I think what we can dive into now is just sort of, and we can all chat about it a little bit, is just if we have an athlete that either comes to us and all, it was weird. I think I'm thinking to myself, like, I probably wouldn't seek out a coach pregnant. I would just, do my own thing because I wouldn't be training for anything. But, if that were to or if we had a woman come to us and ask our advice or something, like, how should I approach this with training in pregnancy, or if you have an athlete that you're coaching and they become pregnant and they decide to continue, like, how would we address that? What are some of the things we would do? I don't know. I'm curious. I want to start with Jen. No, I just like with your experience, like, because you've had such different experiences, like with both pregnancies. I think you have a really good outlook on that, to like how to kind of approach that with someone, or if you had a friend or someone you knew that was trying to become pregnant and they wanted to run, like, what was your advice to them?
I mean, I think it's hard because going into any given pregnancy, you don't necessarily know how your body's going to react to exercise, what the issues are going to be. Sometimes it's more cardio. Sometimes it's literally like just the ligaments aren't holding it together as well as you would hope they are. So I actually had a conversation with a potential client at one point about, like, she was trying to get pregnant, and just in general, my advice was it's fine to hire a coach. You just have to be on the same page with your coach. You have to communicate with your coach what's going on so they can adequately make changes to your plan. If you're like, the load that I thought I could take on is turning out to be more or maybe less than what reality is showing me. Being able to be flexible to pivot pretty quickly, because there will be days that you feel great. There will be days that you cannot get out the door, and it could be, again, just fatigue. Like, that alone can be an issue with training beyond just being physically able to run. Because I know for me, there are afternoons where I'm like, am I going to exercise or am I going to nap? Well, the nap is probably going to win if I'm even thinking about that. So it's generally just a lot of flexibility and a lot of communication involved. I work with a coach when I'm training. I got about 2 months in and realized I hadn't done any of the plans he'd sent me. And I told him, I was like, I really would love to continue working with you when I get back to running, but I can't do this right now. And I think you just have to be realistic with yourself about what your capacity is. And, even as a coach, what the value of a coach is for you at that point. Because if you're not able to train, or you're finding that you can't follow a plan at all, may not be worth having a coach. It may just be go out and do what you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna agree with that. I think and I also think, like, going back to my experience, like, if you haven't been running, it's probably not a great time to start really in pregnancy. So, like, I was a runner, right? And I took this extended break, and then I was trying to go back to it. If somebody I've definitely sort of advised somebody they would, like, probably wouldn't seek out a coach when they were pregnant. It's a kind of a weird thing, but I would probably be like, maybe don't try the running now. Like, maybe just do something to maintain fitness, do what you can. Maybe do some walking, maybe go do the elliptical, get in the pool. That was the one thing I felt like was wonderful when I was certain like level in pregnancy, because you get in the pool and you have all this front weight. That's the other thing, is just the biomechanics that shift. Everything sort of changes the body. And that's, I think, part of this conversation too, is just this, like I had to wear when I would try to run, or even in just daily going to coach my kids or whatever, because I did coach cross country, but I didn't really run much. I had to wear like a belt thing that would hold up my belly. It was so uncomfortable. And, then when I try to run, it would be like all taut, like I'd be sort of pulled forward with it. So when my hips, I think, grew, like, so even postpartum, and we can talk a little bit about that, there were some changes in my body that just made it really hard for me to get back into running personally. I had some injuries and things like that. So just that alone, like, I just don't think maybe starting a running program in pregnancy is a fantastic idea. I think if you're already running, I think just like we've talked about, you're probably not going to gain a lot of fitness. Just do what you feels good, do what you can. But um, yeah, I definitely wouldn't advise somebody to do any sort of increase in volume or intensity that's beyond what they've already been doing. And the other thing is I wanted to mention, because we talked about this a little bit before we started, was I do think there's a lot out there in terms of like Instagram and professional runners, and they're kind of like, I ran for my whole pregnancy, and you see these like videos of women running and they're pregnant, and it just looks like effortless, and they're running like pro runners, paces that I'm like, wow, I feel like that's probably a good pace for me when I'm not, and I think there's a lot of like, I don't know, just that out there, like, not that it's a pressure, but almost like an expectation. So I
Yeah.
think some women who haven't been pregnant are maybe like, like, I'm a runner, I'm gonna try to run through my pregnancy, and it's gonna be, like, easy because these people are making it look easy. Or there's stories of women who are, finishing a marathon, and they're, maybe not super far into their pregnancy, but they're, like, 12 weeks in or something, and that, I think, not that I'm saying that's a dangerous thing necessarily, because I'm assuming she probably ran it fairly easy, but it's like, that's what you see, and so that's what I've been seeing, and I'm not even pregnant, but I see this, like, news stories that I follow on running, or like at Instagram that I follow some professional runners. And it's like, I think that also is something to be cautious of, because I think a lot of women don't experience that sort of ease, like training and running in pregnancy, or being able to even compete very well, or do something like a marathon. Just it's probably not feasible for most women to do that in their pregnancy. And I don't really think that should be something that unless they feel like they've been training already, and maybe they become pregnant and they're like, I'm just gonna give it a go. I don't think that's something that I would set as a goal. Like like I wouldn't be like, I'm gonna be pregnant, now I'm gonna run a marathon or something like that, because it is a lot of stress on the body. And I feel like there may be some risks that you're putting additional risk with doing something that that long, or that intense with, you have a baby, you have a little being that you have to sort of take care of, right? We have to nourish. And I think that goes, we can talk a little bit about nutrition in pregnancy, but I think we have to think about that too. We don't want to compromise what we've got. We have we have to take care of that little being and make sure we have a healthy pregnancy too. So, I think that's definitely something I would have a talk with my athlete, especially if I felt like they were wanting to do a lot of intense training or continue with the same volume or something like that. I think having that sort of like gentle conversation about, well, you do have to there's this, you wanna have a healthy pregnancy, and so that's probably number 1 priority, right? So running is gonna now take a back seat to this number 1 priority. So that's something too, and I don't know if I think most women feel that way. They wanna have a healthy pregnancy. So I don't think, I'm not assuming women, like, are coming into it and not wanting that, but definitely something, because we do have a lot of type A runners and people that put a lot of pressure on themselves to run, and maybe think they can do something in their pregnancy that maybe isn't the best for them or their baby too. How would you approach it, Justin? I'm curious. I know you're like, it's
I think it's interesting because I mean, I'm a man, so it's hard for me to connect, from like an experimental side, an experience side. But I would honestly say that if a woman came to me and she was pregnant, or if she was trying to become pregnant, I think personally that is a great time to seek out a coach. So the reason that I say this is that my experience is that most people that are seeking out coaches do have some kind of like type A personality. And so sometimes the role of a coach is not simply to give them workouts that will create adaptation and build performance, but it is also part of our job to protect the athlete from themselves. So sometimes if, somebody would come to me and say, hey, I'm pregnant, I would tend to be a lot more conservative with them than probably they're willing to be conservative for themselves. So I think it's a great time to seek out, somebody else to kind of take the reins to remove because there is an emotional component to endurance sports. We all have it. And if hiring that coach allows you to remove the emotional component from it and you simply just have to execute the plan that you're given, then I think that sets you up for success, or it reduces your risk profile. So that would be that would be my justification on why it would be a good idea to seek somebody's help during that time, or if that's
true.
where
Yeah,
you
that's a good
see
way of looking
yourself
at it.
going.
Yeah, especially if you're like the type that pushes yourself a lot, or
Yes, absolutely.
you're like, oh, I'm going to be susceptible to this, like, you know, Instagram stuff where like people are, and I'm going to try to push myself harder to seek someone out. But I think in your case, like, and kind of going back to Jen's experience in college with the coach, like finding someone that understands that because you're saying, oh, I'd be conservative, and you'd be like communicating hopefully with this person, like, how are you
Hmm.
feeling, and
Yeah.
adjusting, and there's a lot of that communication that needs to happen. But you need to find somebody, if you're going to be seeking them out, that understands a little bit about pregnancy, and like,
Yeah.
knows that you need to be conservative and kind of be communicative. And that's where I think, you know, it could be very helpful, or, depending on the coach, maybe. So, it could also be not so helpful if they're unaware of the restrictions and things like that. But yeah, I think that's a great
But
point.
I don't want to say that discounting a male coach with a female athlete just because I can't be empathetic. I guess that's the right word that I'm looking for. I can be
You can be
compassionate, but
empathetic.
I can't be
Yeah,
empathetic where
you
I
can
know
be, but yeah.
exactly what
Well,
you're going
true.
through. I've experienced that, so there is some kind of like connection that I can draw on a past experience. It's like, oh, I remember this and this, so this is how they're feeling. That's going to be a little bit challenging for a male coach with a female athlete, but I still think a male coach can do a good job with coaching a female athlete that is pregnant or is on the road to pregnancy. So
Yeah, as long as
I
they're
don't
like,
want people to think, well, I have to find a female coach so that they know what I'm going through.
right, yeah.
As long as the communication is there and it's freely flowing, you can feed me the information that I need to have an understanding and be compassionate and then make the adjustments that are necessary, even though I don't have a direct parable experience to kind of like what you're going through. I guess any other kind. Yeah, I would agree. I agree with you that if it's not the time to introduce a new type of activity, especially something that is high stress and high impact, if you come to me, if a female athlete came to me and said, hey, I'm pregnant now, but I want to learn how to run, I'd be like, maybe we can talk about this in, 15 months or so. So,
Everyone, hey, no level.
but we can find stuff for you to do to build some level of fitness, because I think it's important, because not only will it help shorten the recovery period postpartum, but I think that there is going to be there has to be a physiological impact to maintaining fitness during a pregnancy. So it seems reasonable to conclude it. I don't have any science and studies behind it, but it seems logical.
I don't feel like there's much, I think a lot of physicians, I mean, it used to be that you went, like years ago, like you'd be pregnant and they would be like, don't do anything. You must sit
Yeah, I think
and
that's
do
more out of
nothing. You know
fear
what I
than
mean?
anything
Out of
else. So
fear,
it's,
yeah.
yeah.
And so now I think that school of thought is still very prevalent. I think I remember still doing some weight training, in pregnancy, and following some women who are like highly, like CrossFit athletes, and like seeing their feeds. They were doing some strength training stuff still in pregnancy, and just seeing the comments, which were like, oh my God, you're gonna have, like, it's just like this fear, like, crap, things people misunderstanding, well, they've been doing this for years prior. They're probably fine. Should you start a strength training program in pregnancy and lift a bunch of heavy stuff? Probably not, but I think having some fitness going in and then maintaining, or even if you could build a little bit or just do something to be somewhat fit, I think that definitely helps with the actual having the child and then the postpartum period and recovery for sure. But being able to like, I mean, it's very physical in my experience because I had a vaginal birth or whatever, and you say that and it's like I get like whatever, but it took me like 6 hours of pushing. It was it was like a marathon event. It was like I kind of was like, wow, like all this marathon running actually kind of prepared me for this event of having a child. And I think if I hadn't been somewhat fit and hadn't been strength training, I don't know if I had been able to do that. They might have had me have. Luckily, he was healthy, but I don't. They might have been like, you have to have a C-section. You're not going to be able to get this child out, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But because I was so strong and able to just keep going, they were like, okay, well, you're obviously like strong, so we'll just let you keep going and pushing and whatever. So I think that helped me. And then also in that postpartum period, I didn't come back in 2 weeks because I hadn't been running prior. I think if I'd had been running prior, I might have been able to come back sooner. But I was able to get up and walk, and I mean, it's been a while. It's the '06, so this is like my memory of 6 years ago. But I started jogging probably like a month or so in. I started kind of run jogging, and pushing in a stroller. And then once I kind of felt good, I sort of took off and I was running, and I didn't really have a lot of issues. So yeah, I don't know. I definitely think the fitness and doing some sort of movement helps. But I think there's probably some
There's different
people
methods
that
that
I don't know,
that
like,
we
and I
can
don't know what the
employ.
recommendations are exactly,
Yeah.
but I just don't think we have research. No one's going to do a study where they're like, let's push these women who are pregnant as far as
Yeah.
we can
Push
with
them to the
fitness,
brink.
see what happens, right? It's all like a lot of things with pregnancy. It's ethically, you cannot do certain things. And so there's a lot we don't always exactly know in pregnancy. And so there's, some of that is a limitation, and obviously for good reason, but I don't know. I think that's from your end on like, I don't know. And we can maybe jump into even like the
I
post.
think the physiological issues that take place like during the pregnancy. I mean, this is just anecdotal and observational, but typically I think that you can kind of determine sex of the child based on how the mother is carrying the child. Typically girls
I
are
don't know. That's
carried higher up
I think
and
there's a lot
boys
of
tend to
myths in
be
that one
carried
too.
lower
I
down.
don't know.
It could be a complete myth, but this was my observation, is that that's
I
how
think
my
that I don't
wife
know.
carried
Yeah.
our two kids. I'm curious,
I don't know.
for your
No
experiences,
idea.
can you confirm this?
I don't know. I feel like
Boys.
yeah, I had boys and they were all high. I mean, I don't know because I never had, he didn't seem to be low,
Or maybe
I
I
don't
have
know.
it
I had
backwards,
no
that
idea.
girls
Like,
are low and boys are
I
higher up.
thought
I can't remember.
we didn't get the gender. We were going to have it be like a big surprise, which is weird because I'm usually like to plan. But I just wanted this giant surprise. And I was like, okay, we're going to wait and see. Although my husband, I think we had like a special ultrasound that we had to do. And I think saw the gender, so he knew, but and I think I kind of knew, but I didn't really know, like I couldn't tell anything. There wasn't anything, having another one, I'd be curious if I had a girl if I'd be as sick because I was so sick. I wasn't like hyperemesis. Oh, well, I don't, because any more sick, I would have I would have been diagnosed as hyperemesis. It's a thing called hyperemesis gravidarum, and it's when women just cannot keep anything down. And I've seen them in the hospital, and they have to take like parenteral nutrition. And I'm like, I do not want to be. And that is like the worst of the worst. And I'm like, I cannot, I don't want to be there. But, so I don't know where I'm going with that, but I just think it's like, I
I'm
don't
just
know.
curious on the demands on the body in order
Yeah.
to
Oh, yeah.
perform at a certain level. If you're carrying the child lower down,
I don't know.
and
I
it's
mean, maybe, yeah,
pulling
maybe like
it's pulling you forward versus
like,
carrying
or
it higher up. So if you're
biomechanically, yeah. But
if you're
at some
carrying the
point,
child higher up, maybe you have a little bit more freedom in terms of like your ability to train
because then
versus carrying
if you
them
think
down
about
low.
it
But
being
I don't know.
higher up, now you're squishing the stomach a lot.
Okay.
And so now your gut, that's probably my son was higher up. My dang rabbit is my son was like higher up, and I think that's maybe partly why I was sick. Hold on. So I think maybe that's something to that too, is just your stomach is now squished and you can't eat as much. And so there's probably either way you're dealing wherever it's carrying and wherever the baby's in, it's always kicking somewhere. There's always some sort of discomfort, but yeah. Here, I'm gonna give it to Jen. I'm gonna go deal with
Yeah, Jen.
Yeah, I definitely experienced more discomfort with this one in terms of like how I'm carrying. This one's another boy. Teddy, my first, was much higher. I didn't really need the belly band much. This one, even when I was running early, I was KT taping to like pull things into place,
Mm-hmm.
which works pretty well. But you can like even now, I go on walks. I go on longer walks, and I can feel it like in those like hip ligaments, the round
Mm-hmm.
ligaments around the belly and all that. There's definitely strain. And it's at a point where I have to be aware of how quickly I'm walking. It used to be I have to be aware of how much I'm pushing myself running, but now I'm like, I need to make sure my walks are leisurely and not like a fitness event now, which has been a change in the past like month or so.
Yeah. That makes complete sense. Yeah.
And I think it's just everyone's experience because the baby will be different places. I don't know. It's just like, and then maybe more on one side, and you're like, oh man, it's all over here. So I think it's just interesting, Yeah. The pregnancy is such an interesting experience. I know you'll never experience, but it is interesting, like, kind of going through that. And yeah, it does change, I think, your biomechanics and the way you can how fast, how much you can push your at the end, especially as you get to like the end
Yeah.
when you're, it's just expectations at that point for training, I think should be pretty minimum, you might be able to still slog out some miles, but even the most elite of the runners, I don't think are probably able to do the much, at those last month or so. So, yeah, let's like refocus a little bit on the well, I know you had asked Justin about nutrition. So do you wanna
Yeah.
just chat a little briefly about that, just really quick? Mm, and I think we can talk about postpartum because I think that's, worth a
Yes, I want to
conversation
get
too,
back
and I
to
think
that.
that's more where the nutrition is. So, like we mentioned before, I think but when you're trying to become pregnant, you wanna eat enough so that you're not under fueling. And I think when a woman is pregnant, they're typically told it depends on the trimester. So the calorie needs are actually quite minimum the first, I think, trimester. It might be like 100, 200 calories. The baby's not really growing
Yeah.
much, a ton.
Makes
But then
sense.
there's a huge amount of growth that happens in like the second and third trimester. So the calorie needs are generally only going to be about 300, maybe 500 a day. It's not double. So people are told you're eating for two. I think that's when people decide they're going to eat for two, they tend to gain a lot more weight than what's recommended. And most women kind of have a weight gain recommendation based off of their current weight of how much they should. So pay attention to that and make sure if you're training that you're weighing yourself and you're knowing that you're gaining the appropriate amount of weight. So if you're not gaining for whatever reason, that's I think kind of a red flag. Like if you're not gaining the weight that you need to gain during pregnancy, it might be a flag that you're not eating enough or you're running too much or something like that. But generally, it's not going to be a profound amount of calories. But if you're already moving a lot and already struggling to get enough energy, that could be 300 calories can be a lot. So just keeping that in mind, like fueling and it becomes even more or, just as or more important in pregnancy that you're eating enough. And, just make sure just listen to your body, eat. Don't, it's not a time to be like, under fueling for whatever reason. But I think the other thing is just the nutrients, like the vitamins, the calcium, but iron, getting those levels checked, making sure your iron is adequate because in pregnancy, the baby's taking a lot of this, think about it, they're sucking in a lot of that nutrients out of you. So it's not like a bad thing, but you just have to make sure you're like taking your prenatal, getting things like iron levels checked, maybe making sure you're taking a little extra calcium, just like potentially more than what you would when you're pre-pregnancy. I mean, although most take a prenatal anyways before they're pregnant. But that's probably the biggest thing. I don't think there's much difference in terms of fueling before, during, and after. I mean, it'd generally be the same other than just trying to get the extra calories and the extra vitamins and minerals. So yeah, then I don't know if you have any thoughts with pregnant. Like, it's been a while since so I'm like, is there any other nutrients? I don't know.
Yeah. So, Jen, what is your experience? So let's compare your first child and now what you're going through now. Has your nutrition changed drastically from one pregnancy to another?
So with Teddy, I lived on fried chicken sandwiches, but
Solid.
yeah, I was going to
Sounds delicious.
across the street to the fast food place to eat because I'd bring my lunch and be like, I don't want this, so I'm gonna go get fried chicken. In my experience, the biggest thing is making sure you're eating something you can get down, because it's all well and good to plan meals, but then you plan something and you look at it and you're like, I can't stomach it. Like, there was one pregnancy, my husband made this wonderful pulled pork. He never cooks. He made pulled pork. I took one bite, ran to the bathroom to vomit right after. So it's one of the things I started doing is I had a hard time in the mornings. I started employing liquid nutrition, which normally I wouldn't do. But I'm like, if a protein shake's what's going to go down and stay down, that's what I need to do. And, even if I don't like it, I can chug it versus like actually like working through some food. So added a lot of like liquid additions to my diet this time around, which it's kind of a last resort situation. If you can eat real food, you should eat real food. But at the end of the day, the goal is to stay fueled. So you do what you need to do
Yeah,
to stay fueled,
yeah,
whatever that looks like.
the food aversions, I think, is my word. Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know, like, now it's all coming back to me. I'm like, "Oh my gosh," like, I had, like, an aversion to meat, like, I love meat, but I couldn't like the pulled pork. I remember I could eat fruit in the morning, and I could have, like, yogurt and cottage cheese, but there's so many things I didn't feel, and then I'd throw up something, and then I'd be like, "I can't have that again for a while," or they're like, "Take ginger, it will help you with your nausea," and then I overdid the ginger, and it was like anything ginger made me nauseous instantly. So I just like, it's just like things like that. So you're on top of having to eat extra, you're now so yeah, I think, like, don't be afraid if like, the fried chicken sandwich, yeah, this okay, yeah, maybe, like, it's not the most healthy thing out there, but if that's what you're gonna eat, like, you need to eat that, and I remember eating, like, later on, like, I just wanted, like, a Reuben sandwich, or, like, there was just random things I just have, like, these cravings for, and I'm like, "We gotta get," and it's just, like, listen to your body, like, even if it's a weird craving, like, it's probably either your body is telling you need whatever's in that, or you just need to eat, maybe not if things are not sounding good, just kinda going with whatever sounds good is, like, probably the right way to go. So that's a good point you bring up. It's like I'm, like, remembering all my little weird things that happened to me in pregnancy with my food. But yeah, so good thing, good points.
Is there a particular time of day as an athlete? I think, there's some people that perform best in the morning, and then there's some people that perform best in the evening. But if you're pregnant, and typically if your nausea is coming in the morning and you're a morning training person, kind of how do you remain flexible with something like that? Did any of you
Yeah.
experience anything like that where you kind of had to alter your routine based on like when your nausea would typically hit?
Yeah, I think I would do mostly, like, afternoon because it was worse. It was definitely worse for me in the morning, although it was kind of all day, so it was kind of like but honestly, when I would start working out, sometimes it would get better actually, which is
Mm,
interesting, but it was
that
just
is
the
interesting.
motivation to go do it when you're not feeling great. Like, if you can imagine feeling nauseated and then being like, "I'm gonna go try to do a run or
Yeah.
something," but once I got
No.
out, it would kinda go away a little bit, so I don't know what your experience is.
Yeah, so I already, like, before I was pregnant, was a little bit, like, reactive hypoglycemic, so I was always eating before my runs in the morning. So I'd taken to bland foods before already. I do Rice Krispie treats before every run, and that continued to work for me. The only thing that I did start adding is I did start adding more protein in my mornings because that does somewhat combat nausea, being more full and eating, because it used to be they tell you have saltines or whatever, but now they're like, you actually do want like something substantial. You want to have like real food in you, sustaining your energy, and that'll actually help more. So, all that to say, I didn't have a lot of trouble with like morning runs. Personally, it wasn't any better for me in the afternoon. And in some ways, it was worse because then I'd be in this state of like semi nausea, but also afternoon fatigue would hit. So, I'd be
Yeah.
double hit as opposed to in the morning where I'm like, I still kind of have energy and I can get out and I can do something.
The fatigue is real. I remember being at work one time and there was, like, somebody canceled, and I went out to my car in the middle of the day. It was, like, 2, maybe 1 in the afternoon, just took a nap. I would never do that normally. I'm a terrible napper, but I just like put the seat back and I was out, like so tired. So that's something, women are combating too, is that sort of, and just sleeping and sleeping and sleeping in and just, and, like, yeah. So you're kind of dealing with that plus maybe nausea. Blues. So there's a lot, like, again, to think about, and planning in the runs and around when you're more energetic is true. I don't remember. I think it was just kind of random for me whenever I would feel like it or do a workout. It was usually afternoon because that's when I would plan it. But yeah, I don't, I would say just
That
go with
brings up an interesting point, is the sleep quality during a pregnancy, and we all know that like during
Jen's laughing.
the recovery process really kind of kicks in like while we sleep. So I'm kind of curious on how the impact of being pregnant and training at the same time would affect your ability to recover from session to session, simply because your sleep has been interrupted. And it gets even worse as it gets later into the pregnancy. You got this beach ball that's sitting on top of you. I imagine it's pretty challenging to like
Right. Yeah.
sleep, soundly enough to just have the energy to get through the day, not counting like being active.
And you're like in it. I don't know, but it's true. Yes.
At this point, I don't think that even if I trained through the pregnancy, I'd be recovering. Basically, my discussion with my doctor went like this. I will take Unisom on nights that I know I have to sleep because I will not sleep otherwise. I'm up all night. And I'm already a light sleeper, so the pregnancy compounds that. So basically, the idea is there are sleep aids you can take while you're pregnant. Always talk to your
Okay.
doctor before taking one.
Yeah.
And as I said, my strategy has generally been, if I know I need to do something or accomplish something the next day, I will take it. Otherwise, I will suffer through it, especially if I know I'll have time to like nap or take a breather during the day the next day. But I mean, it's just one of those things that you can only do so much to get around it, because it's not just the discomfort. Like, this baby decides he wants to have a rave at 11 p.m. most nights. So you're laying
Yeah.
there and there's something like kicking you and like dancing in your belly. Not exactly easy to sleep even after you've taken a sleep aid. And it can happen at 2 a.m. too.
That's reminding me of my, yeah, Theo was the same way. It'd be like in the middle of the night and he'd be like barrel rolling there and you're like, what the heck? But yeah, I did
It makes
rely a lot
sense,
on
because
Unisom.
I always heard the whole story is like if you the mom are moving around, then it's almost kind of like it's like a rocking sensation.
Yeah.
And so they typically will sleep while you're moving. It's when you stop moving and there's no longer this rocking sensation that's when they wake up and they want to play.
That's true. I think
So it
that's true,
seemed
actually.
kind of makes
Yeah, you're
sense.
right. He wouldn't be moving, then I'd be like at night or in the mid, I'd be working, and I've got like somebody across. I'm trying to teach, diabetes education or nutrition, and this baby's in here, like, and you're like,
Yeah.
and you're sitting still, and and you're trying to
Yep.
concentrate, and you're like, oh, it's hard. And then yeah, plus the lack of sleep. So I think that's true. Like maybe the recovery piece may not be there so much, especially in the latter portion of, because you're really tired. I think I slept a lot, and then got to a certain point when it was like maybe 32 weeks or so in, 30, somewhere around there, a couple months or before my due date at least. And I was, wow, the discomfort and the, just trying to get in a position that was comfortable was so hard at night. And so you're kind of constantly rolling around trying to get comfortable. It's just really hard. And so any expectation at that point of, train, first of all, you're probably, you can't train that much. Second of all, so you really, I think the expectation then is really just trying to do movement, be a little more gentle. Yeah. So I'm kind of thinking, I mean, we're at like an hour, over an hour. I always wonder, like, we wanted to talk about postpartum, but I think that's almost like an hour-long conversation on its own. Maybe we can have Jen back after she's, no, I'm just kidding. Maybe we can have her back after she's had her baby. So, I mean,
Yeah, I
not right
think
away.
that's a valuable discussion, because I mean, it makes sense that the one outstanding issue that I would foresee from postpartum would not just be the caloric demands that are going to be necessary in order to feed the child if you choose to breastfeed, but the adjustment that takes place to the pelvic floor, and especially if you're a runner, it makes sense that there's going to be some patience that's going to be required for returning to running. I found it fascinating that Jen, you said that you returned running what was it, like 2 weeks after? Or Katie, did you return
No,
2 weeks after?
it took me a while, but no, Jen did.
Okay. I find that fascinating that you could return to running that quickly, given the structural changes that happen to a woman's body post childbirth.
I think I benefit a little bit from being a slightly lazy runner sometimes. So for me, I'm very good about if I'm getting these signals that my body's not feeling good or there's discomfort, I'm good about listening to them. I can kind of turn it off when I'm in like a big training cycle or something like that. But I don't know, like those points where I like don't have an incentive to train for something, if there's something that's triggering like stop, I'm more than happy to listen to it. So I also had a C-section that probably factors in a little bit in terms of like the
Okay. Yeah.
pressure coming down. And as I said, I ran up until the day before I gave birth. I also was 35 weeks, so a little earlier, not quite the same loading as if you'd gone through 40 weeks. I didn't have any issues. I think that for this pregnancy, I probably will talk to a PT before going back to running. I think that's something that any woman going through a pregnancy
Yeah.
and childbirth should do prior to running, because your doctor just doesn't do a full assessment of some of the things that need to be checked off. Also, like mental assessments are important. Postpartum depression is real. You want to make sure you're not using running as a crutch or something like that.
Good point. Yeah.
So there's a lot.
I feel like,
Yeah.
I'm like this because there's that, I think the changes and then the mental piece and the PT, like the actual pelvic floor piece that I think isn't always addressed by a physician. There's so much, and then the caloric and the nutrition needs. So yeah, let's just focus, I think. I mean, we talked a little bit about postpartum, but I think we need to have that be almost another entire discussion on its own. So do you mind? We'll stop. We'll cap it off there and then come back to that. And I think most
Yeah.
women
We'll
would
save
wanna
that
hear
conversation for another day where it can
We'll
get the
see if
attention
Jen
that
was
it
willing to come
deserves.
back and talk again. She might be like,
Yeah.
I don't know about this. She might be okay. I'd love to have because I think it's valuable to have. I mean, I have my own experience, but I really wanted to bring Jen in because she, having had sort of the experiences that she's had, I think it brings something very valuable to the conversation. I think every woman goes through something. I'm sure other women who are maybe listening are also like, they didn't talk about this. This was my experience. And so I think it's hard to kind of capture everybody's experience with it and what they've, how they've approached running, but hopefully it's helpful and valuable. And I'd love to follow up with another discussion on the postpartum, because that is a whole discussion and almost another hour-long discussion all at once. So yeah. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to add? Yeah. I think we're good.
Jen's like, I'm done.
She's like, it's
I
been
wanna
an
get outta
hour.
here.
It's hard to
All
talk
right,
for an hour.
Yeah, so I just want to do some housekeeping before we sign off for this episode. If you've listened to this episode and you are finding that there is an experience that you would like to share, a great place to do that is in the Facebook group that is tied to the podcast. So go on Facebook and go and search for the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast group. Ask one simple question and we'll let you right on in. This is a great place for you to share your experiences during your training. Ask any follow-up questions from previous episodes. Katie and I are active in that page, so we are more than happy to fuel discussions in that location. And as we build out this community, you can expect to see more additional content being pushed out to that particular area. Both Katie and I are active coaches, along with Jen. So
we'll
I know
include Jen's stuff in the show notes.
we will. Yeah, so we'll put Jen's contact information in the show notes since she is a coach for Team Run in Fort Collins. We want to make sure that
I think it's
people
national, so I think she can see anyone anywhere.
Okay.
But she's located in Fort Collins. But yeah, we'll include her. And if you have an Instagram or anything, we'll share that too.
Yeah.
We'll include her.
But
Yeah.
Coach Katie and I are actively taking on athletes onto our rosters. So if you're looking for a new approach for 2026, or you just want to turn the duties over to training plan creation, you're just too busy and you'd rather just execute a plan and remove all that stress, both Coach Katie and I are taking on athletes. Katie focuses on dietetics and running, and I do multi-sport and single sport, so swim, bike, and run, and triathlon. So I think that if you're enjoying the content that you are listening to, whatever platform that you're listening to it on, whether that be Spotify or Amazon or iTunes, please leave us a review and a comment. Those are greatly appreciated. It helps us reach other listeners that are just like you, and we can grow out this community like we're trying so hard to do. So again, thank you, Jen, for joining us on this episode. And we really appreciate the time and the vulnerability when it comes to sharing your experiences during your pregnancies, and in talking about your college experiences. I really appreciate your willingness to share with others on that. So thank you very much. All right, guys. So that's it for us. This has been the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, the athlete stories with Jen Fishman. I'm Coach Justin, head coach owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, along with Coach Katie, owner and coach of Fuel to Run. Until next time, we look forward to it. Happy training, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Feel free to leave us up to a 5-star review on iTunes and Spotify, because leaving a review really helps others like you find us. Visit the podcast website for other episodes of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast at enduranceathletejourney.buzzsprout.com. Have questions or comments about the podcast? Send Coach Justin and Katie an email at theenduranceathletejourney@gmail.com. For all things coaching, visit Coach Katie at fuel2run.com and Coach Justin at tabularasaracing.com. Again, thank you for listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, and remember to find joy in the journey.